The dust storms had been raging for 3 days when Kira found the archive buried beneath the collapsed settlement. Her hands, calloused from years of scavenging the wasteland, carefully brushed away debris from the metal container that had been her mother's final gift, a collection of military records from the war nobody wanted to remember. 23 years old and hardened by a life of survival, Kira had never known peace. The world she inhabited was one of endless gray horizons and scattered ruins, where humans scraped by in small communities, avoiding the forbidden zones where alien technology still hummed with mysterious power. But as she opened her mother's archive that night by flickering candlelight, she discovered a war that had been deliberately forgotten. Captain Jackson Cross stared back at her from a faded photograph, a man with steel-gray eyes and a kind of face that had seen too much combat. According to the records, he had led the final assault on Nexus Prime, the massive alien city that rose like a crystal mountain on the eastern horizon. The mission had failed, most soldiers died, and Jackson had simply vanished. But Elena Voss, Kira's mother, had written something different in her personal logs. In her dying days, she had confessed to Kira about the man who had saved her unit, who had volunteered for a suicide mission to buy them time to escape. They didn't just kill him, Elena had whispered. They made him an example. He's still out there, still waiting. The words had haunted Kira for months. Now, reading the classified reports, she understood. The aliens didn't just execute prisoners, they displayed them as living monuments to human failure, suspended in stasis fields that kept them conscious but frozen, a warning to any who dared approach their cities. Kira spent the next week preparing. She gathered supplies, modified her scavenging gear, and studied every map of the Nexus zone she could find. The other settlers thought she was insane. Nothing lives out there except ghosts and radiation, old Henrik warned her. That city's been dead for 20 years. But Kira knew better. She had seen the lights dancing across the alien spires on clear nights, had felt the low hum that seemed to pulse from the earth itself. Nexus Prime wasn't dead, it was waiting. The journey. The journey took 4 days across increasingly barren landscape. The familiar browns and grays of the wasteland gave way to an unsettling iridescence that seemed to shift with each step. Strange formations of crystal jutted from the earth like frozen lightning, and the air itself felt electric against her skin. Then she saw him. Captain Jackson Cross hung suspended 30 feet above the ground, encased in a shimmering field of blue energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. His body was perfectly preserved, the same muscular frame from the photograph, the same determined expression, as if he had been caught in a moment of defiance. But his eyes tracked her movement as she approached. He was alive. After 20 years, he was still alive, still conscious, still waiting. Kira's hands trembled as she reached for the alien control mechanism at the base of the energy pole. She didn't know what would happen when she freed him, didn't know if the aliens would come, didn't know if she was about to change everything. But she had promised her mother, and promises to the dead were sacred. The energy field flickered as her fingers found the activation sequence. The liberation. The energy field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass, and Jackson Cross fell hard onto the crystalline ground. For a moment he lay motionless, his body rigid from decades of stasis. Then he suddenly convulsed as 20 years of suspended breath rushed into his lungs. Kira knelt beside him, her heart racing as she watched the most legendary soldier of the war struggle to remember how to breathe. His skin was pale but unmarked, his dark hair untouched by time, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, held the weight of every conscious moment he'd endured in that energy prison. "Easy," she whispered, placing her hand on his chest as violent tremors shook his frame. "You're safe now." His gaze locked onto hers with desperate intensity. When he tried to speak, only a harsh rasp emerged. Kira quickly brought water to his lips, supporting his head as he drank. The simple contact sent unexpected warmth through her. This man was real, solid, alive, after existing as legend in her mind. "Who?" he managed, his voice barely audible. "Kira Voss. My mother was Elena Voss. She served under you at Firebase 7. She watched recognition flicker in his eyes. She told me where to find you. Jackson tried to sit up but collapsed back against her. 2 decades of immobility had left even his enhanced soldier's physique weakened. Without hesitation, Kira pulled him against her chest, letting him rest his weight against her as she rubbed circulation back into his arms. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Here was the legendary Captain Cross, reduced to vulnerability in her arms, while she, a mere scavenger, had become his salvation. Her fingers worked along his shoulders and neck, feeling the tension of 20 years slowly release under her touch. "The city," he whispered urgently. "They'll know I'm gone." But as they looked toward Nexus Prime, something was different. Lights that had remained constant for decades now pulsed in new patterns. Deep beneath the crystal spires, something was awakening. "What did you do to me?" Jackson asked, studying her face with new intensity. "Nothing. I just freed you." But even as she said it, Kira felt the change. The air itself seemed more charged, and a low vibration thrummed through the ground beneath them. Jackson's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. "Elena's daughter," he murmured, wonder in his voice. "She used to talk about you, her little fighter." The way he looked at her made Kira's breath catch. This wasn't the distant hero from old photographs. This was a man who had been alone for 20 years, who was seeing genuine human warmth for the first time since his capture. "We need to move," she said, helping him to his feet. But as he stood, swaying against her, neither pulled away from the contact. The revelation. "There's something you don't understand," Jackson said, his voice growing stronger. "My capture wasn't random. I was carrying something, encrypted codes that the aliens needed to keep dormant. My release." He looked toward the horizon, where new lights were beginning to flicker across the wasteland. "It's activated failsafes I helped design 20 years ago." As if summoned by his words, a deep rumble shook the earth. In the distance, structures that had lain buried for decades began emerging from the ground, human structures, their surfaces gleaming with technology that had waited patiently for this moment. Kira steadied Jackson as another tremor passed through them. "What fail-safes?" His smile was grim but determined. "The ones that were supposed to win us the war." Around them, the dead wasteland was coming alive with forgotten human technology, and in the alien city, warning signals began to sound for the first time in 20 years. The facility. The nearest facility had risen a mile from where they stood, a sleek structure of human design that hummed with barely contained energy. As they approached, Kira supporting Jackson's still unsteady steps, biometric scanners activated and recognized him instantly. "Welcome back, Captain Cross," a synthetic voice announced as blast doors cycled open. "All systems are operational. Awaiting orders." Inside, the facility was a marvel of preserved human engineering. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing tactical data from the last war and current alien positions. But what caught Kira's attention was the way Jackson transformed as they entered, the weakness fading from his posture as purpose filled him again. "This was the real mission," he explained, his hands moving confidently across control interfaces. "The assault on Nexus Prime was a diversion. While the aliens focused on repelling our attack, teams like mine were positioning these facilities across the continent." Kira watched in fascination as he worked, admiring the fluid competence of his movements. "What do they do?" "Disruptor technology. The aliens' advantage has always been their energy manipulation, their weapons, shields, even their cities run on quantum field generators." His fingers danced across the controls, bringing more systems online. "These facilities can create interference patterns that neutralize their technology." The implications hit her immediately. "You could have ended the war. We should have." Pain flickered across his features. "But I was captured before the final activation sequence. The other team leaders died in the fighting. The knowledge died with them, until now." As if responding to their conversation, the facility's central display showed a map dotted with dozens of similar installations, all now awakening across the continent. But it also showed something else, alien response teams moving toward each facility. They know, Jackson said grimly. We don't have much time. Under fire. Working side by side, they began the activation sequence. The close quarters forced them into constant contact, his hand guiding hers on unfamiliar controls, her body pressed against his as they leaned over shared displays. The tension between them built with each passing moment. You know, Jackson said during a brief pause, his voice dropping lower, 20 years of consciousness gives a man time to think about what he's missed. His hand lingered on hers longer than necessary. Kira felt heat rise in her cheeks. And what did you think about? Connection. Touch. The warmth of another person. His gray eyes held hers steadily. Things I thought I'd never have again. Before she could respond, proximity alarms screamed through the facility. On the main display, alien attack craft were descending toward their position, sleek vessels that moved like liquid mercury through the air. How long until the sequence completes? Kira asked, forcing herself to focus despite the electricity crackling between them. 12 minutes. Jackson was already moving toward the weapons locker. Think you can hold them off for 12 minutes? Kira grabbed a plasma rifle, checking its charge. I've been fighting for survival my whole life, Captain. This is just another day. His smile was fierce with admiration. Elena raised a warrior. The battle. The first alien energy bolt struck the facility's shields as they took defensive positions. Through the transparent barriers, Kira could see the attackers, tall, graceful beings in form-fitting armor that shifted color like oil on water. Stay close to me, Jackson commanded, and something in his tone made it clear he meant more than just tactical positioning. As the shields began to fail and the real battle commenced, both of them understood that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of the war, but the future of whatever was growing between them. In the heat of combat, the facility shuddered under alien weapon fire as Kira and Jackson fought back to back, their movements synchronizing with the fluid precision of longtime partners despite having met only hours before. Plasma bolts scorched the air around them while the activation sequence crawled toward completion. 8 minutes. Jackson called out, dropping an alien attacker with precise rifle fire. Kira spun, her weapon tracking another target. The shields won't hold that long. Then we make our stand here. His voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of a man who had already faced death and found something worth fighting for. As an alien breached their defensive line, Jackson moved to intercept, but Kira was faster, her blade finding the gap in its armor with lethal accuracy. Nice work, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. I told you, I'm a survivor. But as she said it, another wave of attackers poured through the failing shields. With 3 minutes remaining, the facility's power grid began fluctuating under the assault. Jackson made a decision that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. He trusted their defense entirely to Kira while he manually stabilized the core systems. She didn't disappoint him. Moving with deadly grace between the control stations, Kira held the line alone, her years of wasteland combat serving her well against enemies who had never faced such desperate, adaptable resistance. 30 seconds. Jackson announced, his hands flying over emergency protocols. That's when the facility's main support beam gave way. Kira looked up to see tons of debris falling toward the activation console, toward Jackson. Without thinking, she threw herself across the room, tackling him away from the controls just as the sequence reached completion. They hit the ground hard, Kira on top of him, both breathing heavily from exertion and adrenaline. For a moment, the world outside ceased to matter as they stared into each other's eyes, faces inches apart. You saved my life, he whispered. You saved the war, she replied. The kiss was inevitable, fierce, desperate, charged with 20 years of his isolation and a lifetime of her loneliness. When they finally broke apart, the facility around them had gone quiet. Through the shattered walls, they could see alien aircraft falling from the sky as their power systems failed across the continent. It worked, Jackson breathed, then kissed her again with renewed passion. The night after. They spent that night in an emergency shelter as similar scenes played out across the world. In the flickering light of emergency power, they finally allowed themselves to explore the connection that had been building since the moment she freed him from stasis. Kira traced the scars on his chest, marks from the battle that had led to his capture. Does it hurt? Not anymore. His hands found the small of her back, pulling her closer. Nothing hurts anymore. Their lovemaking was urgent at first, driven by the intensity of combat and the knowledge that they had found something precious in the midst of war. But as the night deepened, it became something gentler, two people who had been alone too long finally understanding what they had been searching for. What happens now? Kira asked, lying against his chest as dawn approached. Jackson's arm tightened around her. Now we finish what we started. The disruptors have given us an advantage, but the aliens will adapt. We need to build something lasting. His smile was answer enough. I've been waiting 20 years for you, Kira Voss. I'm not letting you go now. Outside, the first human aircraft in decades soared overhead, pilots who had been in hiding emerging to reclaim their skies. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a generation, humanity had hope. And at the center of that hope were two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. 3 months later. The war had transformed from desperate human survival to strategic alien retreat. The disruption network that Jackson and Kira had activated had crippled alien technology across 6 continents, but the aliens were adapting faster than anyone had anticipated. Standing on the command deck of New Haven, humanity's first major city built since the war began, Kira watched alien assault ships testing the outer perimeter defenses. These new vessels had been hardened against the disruption fields, their technology evolving in ways that made them more dangerous than ever. They're learning, Jackson said, joining her at the observation window. His hand found hers naturally, a gesture that had become as essential as breathing over the past months. So are we. Kira squeezed his fingers, then turned to study the tactical displays. The Beijing facility reports they've isolated the adaptation frequency. If we can modify our disruptors. That's not what I meant. His arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth. I meant we're learning what we're fighting for. Not just survival anymore. She understood. What had begun as a desperate mission to free a forgotten prisoner had become something much larger. Across the liberated territories, humans were building again, not just shelters and weapons, but homes, schools, communities. And at the heart of it all was what she and Jackson had discovered in each other. The proximity alarms interrupted her reflection. The alien fleet was moving, not toward New Haven, but toward the primary disruption facility that had started it all. They know, Jackson said grimly. If they destroy the original node, they can bring down the entire network. Within minutes, they were airborne in humanity's newest fighter, a hybrid craft that combined salvaged alien technology with human innovation. Kira piloted while Jackson coordinated the defense network, their partnership in combat as seamless as their partnership in everything else. The final gambit. The battle above the original facility was unlike anything in the previous war. Human pilots, no longer hiding in scattered bunkers, flew in coordinated formations against alien craft whose tactics had evolved beyond recognition. But the tide began to turn when Jackson made a desperate gambit. I'm uploading my command codes through every facility simultaneously, he announced over the comm. If I can create a resonance cascade, that'll overload every disruptor on the continent. Including us, Kira protested. It'll also create a permanent dead zone for alien technology. They'll never be able to rebuild here. She understood the choice he was offering, certain victory at the cost of his own life. The command codes were linked to his biometrics in a way that couldn't be transferred. There has to be another way, Jackson. His voice was gentle but firm. Some things are worth the sacrifice. That's when she remembered something from the original facility's database, a theory about quantum entanglement that the original designers had never tested. What if we don't sacrifice anything, she began, flying toward the central array. What if we share the load? Before he could protest, she initiated her own biometric link to the system. The backlash of energy that coursed through both of them was excruciating, but it worked. The resonance cascade spread across the network without killing either of them, creating a permanent sanctuary where alien technology simply couldn't function. They crash-landed in the ruins of the old facility where their story had begun, both of them unconscious from the neural feedback. When Kira awoke, she found Jackson beside her, his hand still linked with hers through the control interface. "Did it work?" she whispered. "Look up." Above them, the sky was clear of alien craft for the first time in over 20 years. In the distance, New Haven's lights glowed steadily, no longer under threat of attack. 6 months later. They stood in the same spot, but now it was the site of a memorial garden honoring all who had fallen in both wars. Jackson wore the uniform of humanity's first general, while Kira had accepted the role of chief of planetary defense. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked as they walked among the memorial stones. 20 years in stasis, I mean. Jackson stopped and turned to face her, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "How can I regret the path that led me to you?" Their kiss was witnessed by a sunset that painted the sky in shades of hope, the same sky that had been dark with alien ships just months before. Around them, the sounds of construction echoed as humanity built its future, guided by two people who had found in each other the strength to change the world. The war was over. Their story was just beginning. As they walked home together through streets filled with laughter and the voices of children who would grow up free, both understood that they had accomplished something greater than military victory. They had proven that even in the darkest times, love could survive, grow, and ultimately triumph. The stars above them held no more threat, only promise.